Welcome back, everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us for day 2 of our All-Awardee meeting. Once again, this is Madhavi Reddy. Before I start, I'd like to thank the presenters from day 1. They were pretty amazing. They gave us some great information and resources to ponder in the next days and weeks to come. I also was impressed with the wisdom and experience that they gave us yesterday. I think all food for thought for us as we kind of reflect on what we're learning over the past, or over yesterday and today. And you know, please feel free to reach out to any of the speakers for questions or if you need assistance. They provided their contact information, and it's also available in the agenda and speaker bios handout, which is in the download pod. So please download the agenda and speaker bios, as well as the master slides from day 1. Both of those documents are in the download pod, so please download them for your, for future reference. We'll be sharing the slides from day 2 a little bit later today. They will also be placed in the download pod for you to be able to download for future reference. Before we get started with our panel this morning, I wanted to mention a few housekeeping items. Today's meeting will run from 10:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. We're not going to take a break for lunch today, but there will be a short break this afternoon from 12:15 to 12:30 p.m. Eastern. So please, take that time to take a stretch break, do what you need to do, probably check some emails from the morning, but please promptly join us back at 12:30 p.m. Since it's a short break, don't disconnect, just stay connected. We will start the Lessons Learned panel promptly at 12:30 Eastern. Everyone will be muted in listen-only mode, but if you are dialed into a phone line or have enabled audio through your computer, please make sure you are on mute. Please also use the Q&A pod to type in your questions during today's session. There will be several poll questions throughout our sessions today. Please participate if you can. It's always nice to interact with you during the meeting. Today's sessions will be closed captioned for the hearing impaired. As I mentioned, the agenda and speaker bios are available in the download pod. And then also you can download the slides from day 1. And the day 2 slides will be available a little bit later. You can expand your view of the presenter slides by pressing the full screen button in the upper right corner of the slide presentation. If you have any technical issues, please contact webmeeting@alterum.org. Today we'll be hearing first from a dynamic group of fellow awardees who will discuss sustainability lessons learned from child psychiatry access programs, how continuous quality improvement can support the sustainability of PMHCA programs, and the positive impact statewide support can have on long-term sustainability. We titled it More Than Money, Strategies for Long-Term Sustainability, because there are factors, other than money. Money is very important, of course. We understand that, continuously looking for funding, new funding sources, that's very important for long-term sustainability. But there's also other factors that can impact sustainability and really put you, really help you positively in terms of achieving long-term sustainability in your programs. First up in our panel today, we're going to hear from Dr. Sandy Fritsch, the Project Director, Medical Director for the Colorado Pediatric Psychiatry Consultation and Access Program, about lessons learned that she will share from several child psychiatry access programs that she's worked with over the years. Then we'll transition to the continuous quality improvement session, and then end with a presentation about statewide support. So Sandy is a graduate of Michigan State University College of Human Medicine in 1985. She trained in pediatrics, psychiatry, and child psychiatry, triple board residency at Brown University, and completed her residency in 1991. Dr. Fritsch currently maintains board certification in general psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry. Her current professional role is as the medical director of the Pediatric Mental Health Institute at Children's Hospital, Colorado. Her career has encompassed working at the interface of pediatrics and child psychiatry, both for inpatients in pediatric hospitals and in outpatient child psychiatry. Dr. Fritsch has worked in Massachusetts and was fortunate to be involved in the Massachusetts Child Psychiatry Access Program. MCPAP developed a similar program in Maine and is the project director, medical director of the Colorado Pediatric Psychiatry Consultation and Access Program, a HRSA PMHCA funded initiative. Dr. Fritsch's professional interests include advocacy, innovations in medical education, collaborative care models between primary care and mental health providers, and the interplay of physical health concerns and mental health needs. She has been in her current role for almost 4 years, having previously practiced in Maine. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sandy Fritsch.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be speaking about the challenges we all face with sustainability, and I look forward to learning from everyone today as well. It was interesting, hearing Lauren speak yesterday helped me resonate back to how my career got started between doing the triple board program at Brown, where I was already doing pediatrics in combination with child psychiatry. But when I was at Brown, we had a collaborative office rounds grant from Maternal Child Health where we worked with early career pediatricians about how to do mental health, and it was great fun, and it was such great fun that I wrote that part of my job when I left Rhode Island to move up to Massachusetts and practice in Massachusetts and then eventually in Maine. But the collaborative office rounds really guided my own career trajectory towards what eventually became involvement in child psychiatry access programs. As was mentioned, I was in Massachusetts when MCPAP got going. I was not part of MCPAP's original how they were able to get started. So I was not part of the stakeholder groups. I was not part of the work with the state government with respect to how they got funding. But I was in one of the original hubs, similar to Bob Hilt yesterday, who mentioned he had been at UMass Worcester. I was up in the northeast part of Massachusetts and then moved up to Maine, and my evangelism started a child psychiatry program up there. That program was started through grant funding through an organization called MEHAF, the Maine Health Access Foundation grant, and we received grant funding for 3 years. At the end of those 3 years, the program was continued to be supported through philanthropy monies. And while I was up in Maine, we also did an awful lot of advocacy work and forming coalition work, and through that work, I had a legislator who sponsored a statewide child psychiatry access program through the budget, but unfortunately the budget was not passed by the governor at the time. So my own personal work with trying to achieve a state-funded program was not successful in Maine, and now I have moved to Colorado and greatly appreciative of the HRSA funding, and I have some other funding to help support our program that we're building here in Colorado, but sustainability is truly a quest I think most of us are on. So Massachusetts, as you heard from John Strauss yesterday, talked a bit about how the program was started in 2004 with direct line item budget funding, and then state law, and with new mandates collecting funding from commercial carriers covering lives in Massachusetts. But I, in our efforts towards sustainability, wanted to learn more about what has happened in other states that are not HRSA-funded states that appear to have sustainable funding for child psychiatry access programs. So what I did between December of 2019 and February of 2020, this was pre-pandemic, I conducted a series of informal, semi-structured telephone conversations with folks that were in states with patient mental health care programs, as well as the District of Columbia, to learn more from them as to what their understanding of where the funding was coming from, as well as the current funding stream. What was the involvement of commercial carriers and Medicaid towards supplying that funding? In each of the states, what were they able to offer for their core components of the program? What are the perceived vulnerabilities that each of the program has faced, and also what are the reporting requirements? Now, I'm not a person who likes Excel much as far as a program goes. I'm much more of a Microsoft Word person, but I do have an Excel spreadsheet where I have gathered all of the information and am happy to share that at some point in time if there's interest in learning more. So in looking for going through what were the common themes that developed from the different states, and what can we as HRSA-funded folks learn from how different states came to be funded. In my teasing it out, in my going through and looking at it from a qualitative lens, the common themes that appeared included the states of Massachusetts, Washington, Oregon, New York, and the District of Columbia. The trigger towards their development of funding was a phrase actually that Bob Hilt gave to me when we chatted, of community activism, where it was recognized that child mental health needs were not being met, and community stakeholders work together from multiple venues to provide input that eventually then was brought to the state. These included the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Family Medicine, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the different state family support networks, managed Medicaid insurers, and hospital lobbyists. And those were core fundamental folks involved with then going to the state and working out how funding could happen. Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wyoming had not as much community activism, but policy work on the legislative side. At times where it was deemed to have, quote, mental health friendly, unquote, legislators and governors, where either a constituent or personal reasons led them to be aware of the dearth of child psychiatry access programs, as well as the access to care challenges. Notably in Utah, an eye on the high state suicide rate for kids and teens was noted, as well as then the mental health service challenges. And then in looking at Texas and Connecticut, their trigger, their stimulus, which I hope none of our states have, were mass shootings between Sandy Hook and then the shooting at the Santa Fe High School. Those were the triggers to create funding streams for child psychiatry access programs. So in looking at what are the payer sources, and it got a little bit murky in trying to actually determine that. Where and how the actual money is designated was less clear. In the state of Connecticut, the money comes through their Department of Children and Families, and their department has designated a specific amount of money, and it is in the state budget. They've managed to be payer blind, but although they've attempted to get commercial carriers to help pay, they've not been successful in that. District of Columbia had a legislation that passed a mandate to fund, but it was only funded for 5 years. And those 5 years are coming up now, and it's unclear what's going to happen going forward. And pre-pandemic, DC was facing some budgetary woes, so it's unclear what's going to happen going forward. Massachusetts, you've heard about from John. New York was interesting. The money appeared without a known source in their Office of Mental Health, which then led to RFPs for people to develop programs. They're payer blind. Pennsylvania is a state that I find very intriguing in that they have managed Medicare with both a medical side and behavioral health side. And their payment is coming through their medical side of their managed Medicaid as the primary care docs were not being supported for being able to access care for their kids needing behavioral health treatments. Oregon, direct line item in their state budget, but again, budgetary woes. Their money was cut in half since they've been doing it. They are payer blind. And how much money people have really helps to define the services they're able to offer. Texas has yet to get started, but currently they have $10.4 million designated for year one, which they're in right now, and in year two they'll have $16.4 million, which is pretty extraordinary. Utah has legislative appropriations. It's only $360K per year, so we'll see what they're able to develop from there. Washington and Wyoming, Bob talked about yesterday, so I won't go into that. One of the questions that I asked everyone was, what are the common themes of vulnerabilities? And for anybody who liked Monty Python, this was the time where the guy was trying to cross the bridge and kept going. Persistence was really important. So in my conversations with the folks in New York, they felt like they used the phrase, it feels like they're riding a bucking bronco. They're not clear who controls the funding, and as there have been changes in both legislative makeup and governor makeup, there have been some challenges to know how things are going to sustain and endure. We talked a little bit about budgetary cuts. The other and I look forward to the next talk, is that many of the states have to supply a lot of data about both engagement with primary cares, but also that the utilization shows value. So some of the work that Bob has done on return on investment in Wyoming and Washington, I think are things that we all might need to be doing as well. There's a vulnerability of perhaps either opportunities or loss of opportunities as there are trending topics. The opioid crisis, a lot of attention has focused on that, school mental health, and how those trending topics align with the work that we're doing. Politics is at play in all states, and stigma can play out as to with legislators as to whether or not they will then go forward and fund these programs. So some of the selling points is we're, I think we all have to be a bit of salesmen as we're trying to obtain enduring funding. So Massachusetts, MCPAP has provided scaffolding for all the other states and lessons that we can learn from them. As Bob talked about yesterday, Washington and Wyoming have been able to demonstrate reduced costs, which has been a positive benefit within their states. Pennsylvania, as we noted earlier, has come from the medical side of the managed Medicaid to support primary care. And then the Oregon, Washington, Massachusetts, and Wyoming, each of those have had variants of their programs that have spread to adults. They've spread to the perinatal system. They've spread to foster care. So being able to be somewhat flexible and respond to other changes over time, I think is a selling point that we also need to factor in as to how we define ourselves and our programs going forward. So one of the questions people ask is, how much does this actually cost? So the figures that John Strauss had given me with respect to Massachusetts is it costs roughly $2.33 per person per year. In Maine, when I was there, we cost out what we were what the cost of our program was, and we were 17 to 18 cents per member per month, which led to $2.10 per person per year. And for any of you who have been involved in enhanced rates for being a patient-centered medical home or other models, most of those programs, providers are receiving, $5 to $7 per member per month. So that number of 17 to 18 cents per member per month is, in my own personal opinion, is dirt cheap. Colorado has about 1.3 million youth, and if we were going to cost it out and go to someone asking for money, it's about $3 million, far less than what Texas has allocated, but they've actually got a higher population. But I think as we're looking for sustainability, how do we look at how much things cost, I think is a really important component of those discussions. Of course, anytime a youth life is saved who might have died by suicide or have enduring morbidity and mortality from chronic mental health conditions, it's hard to define those cost savings. So recommendations from what I've learned, I think it's really important that as we put on our advocacy hats, we really have to know our state governments. What agencies control funds for child mental health? And each state has a different approach. Can the Insurance Commission be leveraged in the state? That's what Massachusetts was profoundly successful at. Are there limitations with tax law in your state? But also to remember that mental health and behavioral health needs are bipartisan. This is not a partisan issue. Our legislators and people in state agencies all have family members or experience with behavioral health concerns. It's really important to obtain stakeholder support from key community members, and that may be different from different states as different community members may already have those relationships. It's really important as you're working on this to learn your own personal state statistics. What are the youth suicide rates? What are the access to care issues? ACAP, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, has lovely workforce shortage maps where it will show by county where there's no child and adolescent psychiatrist. And as we're all doing, it's really important to track and monitor our data. And if we have evidence of return on investment, but also importantly, testimonials. As you receive emails from folks that you've provided service for and they write back and tell you how helpful it is, save those testimonials because those might be helpful as you're moving towards sustainability. Bringing the recommendations home to my own experience in Colorado, I see a lot of challenges ahead. We have the notion of local control and numerous state agencies that might be funding child mental health issues, and how do you get a voice and a toehold in there? Our managed Medicaid is actually regional, so it's not just one state agency that determines what's going to happen. The regional accountable entities have some opportunities. We have an insurance commission in Colorado that's not nearly as robust as what you find in Massachusetts. Colorado is also the state that passed TABOR, which is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which does not allow for increase in taxes and could then change how budgets are going forward. And now today, end of April 2020, what is the impact of the pandemic on state budgets? What's the impact of pandemic on mental health and mental health needs? My own personal experience currently, our inpatient unit is full. The phones are ringing. The mental health needs are not going away, but we have huge budgetary impacts. So that is what I have talked about today in the interest of letting others go forward, and I look forward to a discussion at the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks for that wonderful presentation. As Sandy mentioned, we're going to hold the Q&A session to the end of all three presentations. There does appear to be a question that's come in for Sandy, but I am holding on to it, and I will get to it at the end of all three presentations, in the interest of time. So now we're going to hear from Ms. Kathy Karstig and Ms. Jenny Allman from the Nebraska PMHCA program. They're going to talk about how CQI can support sustainability in PMHCA programs. So I'm just going to quickly read Kathy and Jenny's bios. Kathy Karstig is a public health nurse leader with many years of experience and recognitions, including Community Health Educator of the Year, Excellence in Nursing, a Nurse Who Makes a Difference, and a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Public Health Nurse Leader Award. Kathy's public health experience ranges from work in the South Pacific and West Africa with the Peace Corps and in several rural regions of the U.S., school health, migrant health, and much more. Kathy fell into the program because she presently is the program manager for the Title V Maternal and Child Health Program in Nebraska. And Title V serves as a lead agency for the program, and together with partners, the project has a wide lens of systems and integration, quality improvement, equity, and inclusion of families and consumers. Kathy has a master's degree in public health from the University of Minnesota and a bachelor's degree from Johns Hopkins University. Jenny Allman is the program manager for the Nebraska Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program in the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. Jenny has a bachelor's in education and over 20 years of professional experience in early childhood. She spent the last 7.5 years as the Nebraska State Lead in evidence-based home visiting. She's a professional, an advocate for children and families, an adult educator, a coach, and most importantly, a mom. She's passionate about what she does, and she likes to train and present. She's given many presentations at the national level, including for Healthy Families America and the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as state and local level presentations and advocating for early childhood programs. She's the co-lead for the Nebraska Partnership for Mental Health Care Access and Pediatrics program. And she has a vision that every family has equitable access to mental and behavioral health care in Nebraska. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to start and Kathy for their presentation.
Hello and good morning. Everybody can hear me? Yeah? Okay, excellent. Thank you. I know there was some trouble with my phone line, so I apologize. Just a reminder that if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the question and answer pod, and we'll be happy to get to those at the end. So I am Jenny Allman, and I am a program manager in the Maternal Child Health at the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. I'm the co-lead on the Pediatric Mental Health Care Access Grant for Nebraska, and I'll let my partner introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. This is Kathy Karstig, joining you from Lincoln, Nebraska. A pleasure to be with you and talking about NEP-MAP. Thanks, Jenny. And sirens in my background, so sorry.
More than money, systems partnerships for sustainability. In Nebraska, our initiative is called NEP-MAP, or the Nebraska Partnership for Mental Health Care Access in Pediatrics. I would like to introduce our leadership team. There's Kathy and I, Sarah Morgan, our Unit Administrator and Title V Director, Raymond Delaney, the Federal Aid Administrator for Title V, Drs. Dejan Su and Drissa Toure from the University of Nebraska Medical Center, College of Public Health in the Center for Reducing Health Disparities as our evaluation leads, and Drs. Holly Roberts and Christian Klepper from UNMC Monroe Meyer Institute as the directors for the Clinical Demonstration Project. Although there are many exciting things going on with NEP-MAP, our focus today is on the Cross Systems Advisory Committee and sustainability through continuous quality improvement and the partnership. The vision for NEP-MAP is that all families in Nebraska have access to appropriate and equitable mental and behavioral health care. We know that we would emphasize systems in integration and make intentional steps not only to align with multi-system efforts, but to honor and build upon work that has been completed in the past through other initiatives in early childhood mental health. We also knew that engaging family members and bringing attention to the daily realities of accessing resources is integral to any success, and we have a very active group of parent representatives that help us guide the work and keep us grounded in our vision. The partnership has committed to increasing best practice screening methods and to increasing the capacity of primary care providers in rural and underserved communities in diagnosis and treatment of mental and behavioral health conditions. It's through the collection of data and the continuous quality improvement methodology at every step, focusing not only on family experiences, but keying in on equity that will take NetMap statewide well past the period of availability of the grant. So I believe now that we have a poll question. In what ways do your projects involve family members? You'd be kind enough to answer, please. It looks like, oops, still going, started to slow down. It's like popcorn in a microwave. It looks like the majority of you have family members that are present in the Project Advisory Committee. In NetMap, we have approximately 10% of our advisory committee is made up of family members who have a child with behavioral or mental health concerns. All of our family members are equal partners in project leadership. And back to the slides. Oh, sorry. What do you see as barriers to family engagement in your project? What do you see as barriers to family engagement in your project? You can type the answer in. Mental health stigma, time, recruitment, financial transportation, working in a rural state, absolutely. The time for families to come to the meetings, lack of transportation or interest. Question maybe on what is their ongoing role. I will say that in NetMap, we respect that family members who are participating in our group are taking time away from their own families or from their jobs. And so we have contracted with each one of them as an expert consultant to pay them for their time and their mileage. The wonderful thing about family member representatives is, where do you start? You can go to family advocacy groups. As it was, I started with people that I knew in our school district who were parents of a child with mental and behavioral health concerns. I reached out to them as a fellow Norris Titan and really talked a lot about what are the kinds of things that were keeping them from being successful accessing the resources. It was very wonderful, the response we had. And then as they reached out to other people that they knew and it garnered interest, it actually started to work out really, really well. I will note that we are a fairly rural state, and some of our parents are coming from rural areas. I live in a small town. Ready to go back to the slides? Thank you. So we're talking about quality improvement. What does quality improvement look like? It's demonstrated with the clinical demonstration project's very targeted enrollment of providers in rural and underserved areas. It's how the Cross-Systems Advisory Committee engages family members as equals and experts, and it's validated by our state evaluation project, not being afraid to ask very crucial equity questions. Products developed by technical work groups forward the goals and align with other initiatives across the state to be disseminated through the partnership. We use quality improvement to replicate and spread the successes of NEPMAP and tweak practices to sustain the partnership vision. Now Kathy is going to describe one of these products and the CQI methods used specifically.
Thanks, Jenny. So now you are seeing that we approach our work with PMHCA through a systems-level, equity-focused, and collaborative lens. And our vision of sustainability in that mindset rests largely on how we engage partners and the impact we see on providers and partners statewide, and how we can influence and measure the uptake of new practices by primary care. We want to build on a foundation of previous expert consensus work around coordinated and comprehensive systems serving all families. We're not starting over. PMHCA is integrated within a long foundation and tradition of doing collaborative systems work in Nebraska. Increasing accurate screening has long been a priority of many partners, and the next natural collaborative step was for NEPMAP to move with partners to consensus work on actual screening methods and instruments. And as may be the case for you as well, whenever we talk about screening, particularly of children within families, we must speak to referrals. And in particular, the perception that many may have that there are no referrals or resources for pediatric mental health and families in Nebraska. And we are working to dispel that through adoption of telephone, telehealth, and internet methods to link our population together. The Screening and Referral Guide is a 26-page document available on our website that was created in order to move NEPMAP and use the vehicle of NEPMAP into greater visibility around comprehensive and universal screening practices to promote social and emotional development and mental health in our population. So when you do look at our screening guide, and I hope you do, you will see that in a single page we capture a view of screening that begins with social and emotional development for the very young child, moves into childhood with recommendations to screen all children not only for continued social and emotional growth, but also specifically autism and specifically blood-lead screening. Into adolescence, screening all adolescents for both depression and suicide risk and substance use. And as well, we include a screening category for parents and caregivers of young children, really providing that life course loop and recognizing that we know that the social and emotional well-being of children and families is intrinsically linked to the social and emotional well-being of their caregivers. In addition, we come out in our screening menu with a universal recommendation of screening all families at virtually all encounters for both social needs and interpersonal violence and trauma. The purpose of the Screening and Referral Guide was to provide that consensus list of commonly used, valid, and reliable tools for screening, moving our provider community from the one or two questions that they might ask some families when they think something might be wrong to more universal practices using standardized and normed instruments for every individual screening encounter. The screening menu is never meant to be intended to be all-inclusive of all validated instruments, but to provide a capture of the type of screening that we had in mind with tools that have some utility, are free, offered in various languages, and health literacy levels. We want to present best practices in screening for both community and clinical providers as being that array of instruments validated and normed for age and culture, as well as reflecting a life course approach. We also, as you may find, found that we cannot address screening practices without adequately addressing behavioral health referral resources, and so those materials are also included in the guide, where our partners in the technical work group identified that there are a couple of very, very good coordinated, curated, and kept up-to-date web or telephone access points for learning about behavioral health providers across the state. And then there are a number of useful statewide and state-level resources that through a phone call or an easy click you can access what's available in your area. The screening guide also provides a yardstick, if you will, through which we are doing some work with our evaluation partners to assess not only clinical screening practices in primary care for children and youth, but we're also very interested in the screening that occurs in our community settings that we really see as serving as a pipeline into primary care and other levels in our system of care for behavioral health. In our method, we convened a 15-person technical work group that represented a great deal of expertise from individuals who've been working in the area of child development and child mental health for some time. Our work group began by creating the consensus, the universality of approach that we were interested in, and then we entered into a series of 7 iterative plan, do, study, act cycles with a total of about 65 individuals who at some point were reviewing portions or versions of the screening guide and giving us excellent feedback and developmental input, including a group of primary care providers who reviewed the materials for us, and importantly, parents and family members as well. We believe the screening and referral guide has application in a number of settings. In particular, we intend to integrate it into our clinical demonstration project to have those enrolled providers being more intentional about using the guide and giving us feedback, dissemination to clinical and community screeners statewide, and working with our systems partners to disseminate it. We do anticipate subsequent versions, but think our version 1 is pretty solid and gives us a great screening starting place to establish baseline. And as I mentioned, our evaluation partner has been very helpful in helping us look at an evaluation approach that both incorporates the screening, specific screenings to try and obtain that baseline measure in practice as we begin this work, disseminating the guide. It will be a portion of our community screening survey as well as evaluation methods in our clinical demonstration project. Finally, I want to note that our technical work group and this cross-systems advisory committee at large has been extremely helpful in building a robust dissemination plan for the screening and referral guide, and their enthusiasm and support for using NetMap or participating in NetMap as the nexus for moving statewide consensus work forward has been really exciting. In closing, we invite you to visit our webpage or contact us. Please do take a look at the screening and referral guide. We'd love your feedback as well as from all other users. We do want to acknowledge our team members, not only the clinical demonstration team and the evaluation team who've been so integral to making NetMap what it is, but of course our Cost Systems Advisory Committee members, technical work group members, and all of the contacts and networks that they in turn access to engage others in our work to date and will continue to do so. And we'd like to make a special shout out for our project officer, Madhavi Reddy, who has been so thoughtful and agile in thinking with us, problem solving with us, and encouraging us to move forward with our systems-wide and equity-focused vision for NetMap. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy and Jenny. Great presentation. we're going to move to our transition to our third set of speakers, Dr. Sandy L. Chung, Dr. Bethany Geldmaker, and Dr. Bernadette Knight from the Virginia Mental Health Access Program, also known as VMAP, to discuss how statewide support for a PMHCA program can positively impact long-term sustainability. We're running a little short on time, so unfortunately I'm not going to read their stellar bios, but they are pretty extraordinary. So if you want to learn more about Sandy, Bethany, and Bernadette, please download the agenda and speaker bios document in the download pod. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, Bethany, and Bernadette. Thanks.
Great, thank you. This is Sandy Chung. Sorry about the delay there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so the three of us are going to tag team this presentation. The Virginia Mental Health Access Program is a fairly new program. We started in 2018 when we became HRSA grant recipients. And then since then have grown very rapidly across our state and have worked on funding through the various presentations you've heard about many strategies on getting funding, and we will just use this opportunity to share our experience and hopefully inform you. I believe, I don't know if Bethany or Bernadette, do you want to go ahead and get started on the next slide?
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Bernadette Knight from Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. Thank you, Sandy, for that introduction to the program. I'm excited to be here and talk about our VMAP program. I just want to make sure that you all can hear me before I keep going.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So what you see here is the 5 regional hubs for VMAP, and as you can see, Virginia is divided into 5 hubs. We have a northern, a central, a eastern, a western, and a southwestern hub. And a little bit later when we go over the operation slides, we'll talk about sort of the program efforts to ramp up the northern and the eastern slides with the online state funding. But this is how we currently have the regional hubs broken out. And for each star, this represents one of the hospitals and where our hub activity is located. And so for each regional hub of VMAP, it includes a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a care navigator, and also a licensed mental health professional. And so for the northern and eastern hubs, these are positions that we'll be building out. But the goal is, as we move towards statewide expansion, that these positions would be in all regional hubs. So since the theme of our presentation is talking about statewide support, we want to take an opportunity to highlight the various statewide organizational family organizations that are all comprised in helping to make VMAP the program that it is. And so this is just a snippet of the representation of state funding, federal funding, and also our hubs that really help to make VMAP what it is, that have been there from the beginning with us. We've had very vocal advocacy for VMAP, and when state funding came on the line, we continue to have that active advocacy voice. We've been working at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services very closely with Department of Health, who has the federal HRSA funding, to make sure that we're aligning our funding and goals for the program. But really just wanted to show that this is a wide range of organizations, both state, local, and really grassroots organizations that are helping to make VMAP the program and the success that it is. And our next slide just gives more of a breakdown of how our funding is allocated. And so, as Sandy mentioned earlier, in 2018, there was some initial work that was done with the federal HRSA grant and also private grants for to fund specific education initiatives. And this just shows the breakdown of current monies or monies that we've been working with VMAP. And so, as you can see, we have state general funding that was awarded by General Assembly. We also have funding from our localities, Fairfax County, who's also been very vested and been a stakeholder in this process, and they've also donated money to VMAP to help make it the program that it is. We also have the federal funding, as you see, which is used to help support VMAP initiatives, and currently which our two departments are working very closely and collaboratively together to make sure our program goes aligned, and also in-kind support. We've had numerous people who donated their time, their effort, their resources, their expertise to really helping to make VMAP the program that it is. And so this just shows that how we're using state and also other funding sources to really make VMAP a strong, successful program.
So this is Sandy. If I could just make a comment about that slide, if you wouldn't mind going back for a second.
Sure.
So I am our state chapter president for the Virginia chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And having the pediatricians engaged and involved in your program really is essential, I think, to the success of the program and utilization of the program. We don't have a timeline up here, but when we started VMAP, it was really from the chapter and the chapter's advocacy. And we actually, it's not on here, but we started with a $20,000 grant from the National American Academy of Pediatrics as an idea and a concept. That very quickly then became much larger as we became HRSA grant recipients. And then after that, we went to the General Assembly, and all those partners you saw on a previous slide were essential to the advocacy work so that we could get into the state budget. And so we got the $1.23 million. That was after we had only been functional for, probably 2 or 3 months. And with that state money, we went back to the legislature this past session and were put into the state budget for an additional $4.22 million. Unfortunately, with COVID and the impact it's going to have on our state revenues, that may be on hold now. But it was really just to illustrate the importance of having your primary care providers and your pediatricians as a part of your advocacy work, because having those stories and boots on the ground work and having the legislators hear from their own pediatricians or from pediatricians in their districts and communities really was key to getting state funding. So if you're considering how to do that, or if you haven't thought about doing that, I would highly recommend it as a strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. And so what I'll do for the sake of time, I know we're running close to 11:30, I'll just give a really brief overview of the next 2 slides, and then I'll hand it over to my co-presenter, Bethany. But as you can see here, this is just a visual representation of how we see VMAP in terms of the specific functions such as education, consultation, and also the steps, which we also see as foundations to our work. And so the education, consultation, care navigation, and telehealth are specific areas where we have work groups which provide their specific expertise in these areas to help guide the larger program work, but also the steps, which are data-informed, equity, family, and community, really are the underpinnings of what we do. We want to make sure that as we develop and sustain the program with state, federal, and other in-kind initiatives and from other organizations, that we're really expanding using a data-informed process, a process that is equitable, and make sure that we have access for youth across the Commonwealth, and also to make sure that we include family and community voice, particularly with care navigation, as we work to make those linkages with the community and have resources available for families after they access our services. And so just to give a little update on our operations, what I want to particularly put your focus on is the next immediate steps. And so I know that we're all in the landscape now dealing with COVID-19, but one of the things that I wanted to mention was that pre-COVID-19, there was work to streamline funding operations between the federal and state initiatives. But also now, since we have COVID-19 on the landscape, we've been working very quickly to make sure that PCPs know that our services are available, and also coming up with some very tangible resources and guides that PCPs can use to provide to their families to let them know that their VMAP is still available and that there are resources for self-care and external linkages that they can make to help families have those resources. So a lot of what we're doing is really now being nimble during the COVID-19 crisis to make sure that resources are available. Also, while continuing our initiatives to make sure that we're streamlining funding and streamlining our reporting requirements. And I would like to say before I hand off to Bethany that one of the things that we did to be able to get to this was that at DBHDS, from our initial state general funding, we went through an RFP process to have a program administrator to really help us centralize VMAP operations and to really help to drive this work that we're doing with statewide collaboration. And so just wanted to mention that in January 2020, the Medical Society of Virginia Foundation was awarded a contract, and they've been working with us since then to really centralize, administer VMAP services. And also, as I mentioned earlier, our campaign efforts to be nimble to the COVID-19 crisis has really been at the forefront of helping us develop marketing and outreach materials to make sure that PCPs know what's available. And with that, I will hand it off to my co-presenter, Bethany.
Okay, thank you. Am I able to be heard this time?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. It gives a good sense when your phone isn't unmuting, no matter what you do, how nimble we are in terms of our state partnership and picking up and carrying on. So thank you, Bernadette and Sandy. So our takeaway in summarizing, because we're at the end of our time, is some lessons that we learned in terms of something that Arthur Ashe said, which was start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I think we've really done that very effectively. So we learned early on, of course, to get our partners and family and community stakeholders early. You saw a lot of that work from our slide on the advocates and the policy workers, as well as the primary care providers, the psychiatrists, just so many partners who've come together to work with us on this. Certainly in terms of resource linking, which is part of use what you have and do what you can, and we've done a tremendous amount of that. Communication is essential. Folks know that, but our panel itself represents the diversity in terms of the primary care, behavioral health, and public health coming together. We have different governance structures. We have a variety of different infrastructures and requirements, but we are learning as we're bringing new folks on board. It's really critical, not only with the variety of funders that we have, but also making sure that all of us have our project objectives and goals are aligned, both with this project as well as with funding requirements, as well as with agencies. So communication is just absolutely essential. Another item is in terms of looking at program structures, how well and how effectively can we maintain our stakeholder interest. And so what we attempt to do in terms of support is a huge amount of that is, of course, our advocacy and outreach. We do it through a lot of our committees. But some of the lessons that we learned is, really being able to work across the multiple systems and the communication. One of the other lessons that we learned was something we picked up as part of a grant, a technical assistance grant that we have through the MCH Workforce Development at UNC, was taking the balcony dance floor perspective. And so that means that if you're up on the balcony and you're looking down on the dance floor, you have a good way of gauging in terms of where there's bottleneck, where things need to be, better managed. But anyway, and we've certainly found that to be the case as we were engaging with our pilot in trying to figure out when to roll out our program and when we were ready in terms of implementation. But much of this work has been from the balcony, looking down on the dance floor, trying to figure out how best to get things working together. And then one of the final pieces that we had had to do with our governance structure, because we're so diverse in coming together in terms of looking at our state support and looking at some of the things that are needed around governance. We have a consensus decision making. We use adaptive leadership. As Bernadette already shared, we use data-informed discussions, but the variety of voices that come are seen as being strong and equally heard and respected. And Bernadette, if you could, I'm having some computer problems here. If you could go to the last slide. So thank you. I'm in the health department, and I think we're having a COVID thing going on because all of a sudden things are slowing down. But anyway, let's see. There it goes. Thanks. One of the things that has already been mentioned was we wanted to be nimble and responsive with our families to what was happening out in the communities, and we recognized that primary care visits are being impacted. Many of them are down. Families were reluctant to go to certain places in terms of receiving care. We wanted to have a resource guide, which I'd already forwarded on to Kelly as our project officer, but we have a COVID-19 self-care resource that was developed with our newest partner, the Medical Society of Virginia, which talks about some self-care, mindfulness, crisis hotlines, managing stress and illness, but really just some basic boots on the ground information to at least get folks started until we can hopefully get them to where they need to go. So some basic, good practical information, some hotlines. But it also helps to keep us very visible in terms of our work. So I think we're going to skip the question in terms of the polling question, and why don't we go ahead and move on to, because we are, well, we're right at 11:30. So Madhavi, would you like folks just to keep typing questions in, and then we'll just close our session?
Yes, thank you so much, Bethany. Yeah, unfortunately, don't have time to address the questions right now, but I am collecting all the questions. I have them in a Word document. We're going to send them out to all of the presenters today to get your feedback, to get your responses to the questions, and then we'll make sure to make your responses available to the participants. So thank you so much to everyone on the panel, to Sandy Fritsch, to Kathy Karstig, Jenny Allman, Sandy Chung, Bethany Geldmaker, and Bernadette Knight for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Cara Dela Cruz, who will moderate our next session with Dr. Marion Earls. Dr. Earls will discuss the natural connections and synergies between the AAP state chapters and PMHCA programs. So thanks, and now I'll turn it over to Cara.
Thanks, Madhavi. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker from the American Academy of Pediatrics for our expert from the field presentation. A summary of her bio. Dr. Earls is a board certified in both general pediatrics and developmental and behavioral pediatrics, and is a clinical professor of pediatrics for the University of North Carolina Medical School. Dr. Earls is a past president of the North Carolina AAP chapter from 2008 to 2010. Her other activities within the AAP include serving as a member of the Council on Early Childhood Executive Committee and chair of the Mental Health Leadership Work Group. Dr. Earls was the lead author on the AAP clinical report incorporating recognition and management of perinatal and postpartum depression into pediatric practice. She was National Co-Chair and Improvement Advisor for the AAP Bright Futures Preventive Services Improvement Project. She's a member of the AAP National Advisory Board on Screening and is chair of the Screening Learning Collaborative Project Advisory Committee. She also is a member of the AAP ADHD Guidelines Committee, which authored the 2010 and 2019 AAP ADHD Clinical Practices Guidelines. She also currently serves as faculty on the Pediatric Integrated Care Collaborative, a project funded through a grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and administered by Johns Hopkins University to support teams from multiple states in strengthening the role of primary care for families with young children experiencing trauma or chronic stress. Dr. Earls received her AB in biology from the College of the Holy Cross, her Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, and her MD from the University of Massachusetts. And again, in the interest of time, that was just a summary of her bio. Please read her full bio in the agenda and speaker bio document in the download pod. And during her presentation, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A pod for the Q&A portion of her presentation. Warm welcome to you, Dr. Earls. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I think I just successfully unmuted myself. I'm so glad to be here. Those of you who know me know that child psychiatry access programs are near and dear to my heart. So we'll get started. I'm really pleased to have heard the presentation from Virginia. So nothing that I'm saying will be a surprise to them, since they were so able to use their AAP chapter in their work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our role, the American Academy of Pediatrics role with pediatric mental health care access programs. You've already heard about me. I don't need to talk about myself. So we thought we would talk about the AAP's role in these, in general, in pediatric mental health, our interest in child psychiatry access programs, and a little bit about the history of our advocacy for those, and then address how AAP state chapters can support these programs, and then suggestions for how they might collaborate. Local chapters might collaborate with these programs. So I always make the joke, I'm a pediatrician, I couldn't possibly have any financial relationships. So today I'm going to briefly give some background on the AAP history and structure. I suspect that many people in this meeting actually have a fair amount of knowledge about this. Give you a little information about what we have heard from our membership, from our periodic survey questions on mental health, and then what are our efforts to increase access to behavioral health, a little bit again about collaboration with chapters, and then some about AAP resources. So a little bit about our start. This is a picture here of Dr. Gruley, who was one of the founders of the AAP. So the AAP has existed since 1930, actually grew out of this section meeting on the diseases of children at the AMA, and there was a dinner gathering and a unanimous decision to start the American Academy of Pediatrics. So we have here a copy of the letter that was sent to pediatricians to ask them to join, and it's significant that they chose the name American Academy of Pediatrics rather than American Academy of Pediatricians, reflecting the focus on pediatric health care. So here's a picture of the first annual meeting, and if you have better eyesight than me, you can see in the middle there are at least 3 women who were members of the original American Academy of Pediatrics. So let's talk a little bit about the AAP today. We have 68,000 members. There are 66 state and local chapters. Those include chapters in Canada. We have multiple national committees, sections, and councils. I'll give you a little information about that. 480 staff, and this is a picture of our relatively new building outside of Chicago. So important just to mention our mission and vision and values. You can see from the mission that we include physical and mental health. Those of you who know me know that I rant on about not separating the head from the body. So we really have a mission that addresses the whole child in the context of family and community. And the vision is not only for children to have that optimal health and well-being, but also for our Academy members to have optimal professional and personal health as well in order to serve those children. So we have multiple success stories. This is a list here of work that the AAP has been at the forefront of with national partners in many of these. And I just want to add the child psychiatry access programs are also an AAP success story in many ways. So here are our 10 districts. You can see it extends well up into Canada. So we have 10 districts with each including multiple state chapters. And a little bit about our structure and governance. There's a board of directors, which includes members elected from their regional districts, as well as now members to represent committees, councils, and sections. We vote each year for a president-elect, and our executive committee includes the current president, the president-elect, and our executive director. So there are 66 chapters, as I mentioned. They're independently incorporated, and really what's wonderful about our chapters is that most work on local and state advocacy, on education, leadership, and networking. Chapters are pretty vibrant organizations, and they're each governed by their own board, executive board, and that are elected by the chapter membership. And then we have committees, sections, and councils. Our 23 national committees really are the groups that look at policy. They tend to be the source of expert opinion. Our committees also include liaisons from other organizations, such as NAPNAP for have nurse practitioner representation, maybe family medicine, psychiatry. We have 57 sections, and sections tend to are membership organizations within the AAP that are usually organized around specialty or multidisciplinary topic areas. We have 15 councils. Examples of those are a council on information technology. We have a council on community pediatrics, council on early childhood. That's a bigger organization and very often also works on policy and education. And I want to mention here, we also have our Family Partnership Network, which is several years old, which where the AAP really stepped up to include family membership to advise the work of the AAP. So there are activities that are common both to chapters and to the committees and sections and councils, that is looking and developing and reviewing and implementing policy, hosting educational programs, lots of advocacy, as I mentioned before, on behalf of children, and also pediatricians and pediatric subspecialists. These committees and sections and councils liaise with other organizations, and at the chapter level that also occurs. In my own chapter, we have a very strong relationship with our family medicine chapter in our state to do work for children and in Medicaid. And then all of these engage and retain members through membership activities. So here are some of the groups in the AAP that are related to mental health. These include the Committee on Psychosocial Aspects of Child and Family Health. We have a section on developmental behavioral pediatrics. You heard mentioned that I currently chair the Mental Health Leadership Work Group that works on resources for members of the Academy on Mental Health. So you can see it's a pretty extensive number of groups. And really, when it comes to mental health, because the Academy has been interested in making sure that mental health is attention to mental health is pervasive, there are many others of our councils and chapters, et cetera, who work on these projects. So I did want to mention that AAP also has been very at the forefront on telehealth activities. We've had a section on telehealth care and also AAP ECHO, and specifically ECHO around trauma-informed care at the current time. And then there are other mental health-related programs you can see here. I'll mention that the CATCH program and the Healthy Tomorrows Partnership for Children program help fund work at the local level that pediatricians are doing at their local level. You'll notice in that second column, the Screening and Practices Project, we are currently getting started with a multi-chapter project to address social-emotional health in young children. We'll be working with 7 chapters. So a little bit about our AAP periodic survey. So these surveys come out and actually have questions about many areas for pediatricians. But I'm going to tell you about 2 of the surveys that actually included questions around mental health. And just to point out some fairly interesting patterns here. So these are from 2004 and 2013. There's 1,600 surveys sent to a random sample of pediatricians in practice. The response rates, respectively, were 52% and 37%. But the point here is that our mental health competencies for many years have suggested that pediatricians should be able to manage mild to moderate ADHD, depression, anxiety, and other associated developmental issues. And you can see here that people feel probably the most confident around ADHD, but you can see that by 2013 there was a little bit of improvement in the area of depression. In the other areas, not really much movement at all around managing anxiety or feeling comfortable about counseling about behavior management or learning disabilities. And if you look at management, actually managing these disorders, you can see that there's a fairly good comfort level around managing ADHD. But for the others, even though we've seen some slight improvements between the two time periods, they're still fairly low. And then if you look at referrals, it's kind of an interesting reverse pattern here. Folks are a little less likely to refer for ADHD, maybe reflecting that comfort level with managing. But you can see that referrals in all other areas are really actually increased over that time. And if you look at what people identified as barriers to being able to manage this, the things to point out are the lack of confidence in the ability to treat with counseling, the indication that they feel that they have had a lack of training in the treatment of mental health problems. What's interesting about that, it's been training for mental health problems in residency has been mandatory for over a decade. But we've had many discussions about often that training is maybe a month or two rotation rather than being imbued in all of the training. But you can see that there has been some improvement in all of these barriers, although these still continue to exist. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what have been the AAP efforts around increased access to behavioral health. We've talked for a long time about the primary care advantage, the ability for primary care clinicians, because they have a longitudinal relationship, to really observe and identify issues when they are just emerging. There's a uniqueness to the frontline role, and there's lots of opportunities for prevention and early intervention. I often talk about the fact that the spectrum of mental health issues that present to a pediatrician in primary care range from functional issues that don't rise to the level of a diagnosis, to some emerging symptoms, to all the way to kids who have diagnoses consistent with the DC-0-5 or DSM-5. Primary care has the ability to integrate mental health perspective into practice flow and mental health interventions into practice flow. The challenges, of course, are around coding and payment and system gaps, et cetera, as you've seen before in the barrier slide. And people need clinical guidance. They need the support and the tools, and there is need for continuing residency training and training once people are in practice. So this is a slide showing our website on the AAP website, and it's going to aap.org/mental health. I point this out because you can see that there are a lot of resources for primary care clinicians for integrating mental health work. I would say there's lots of information and resources here on getting a practice ready to integrate mental health competencies. There's information on psychopharmacology for pediatrics. So it's a very rich site for information for primary care. And we are constantly and currently working on updating lots of those materials. So I mentioned mental health competencies. The original competencies came out in 2009, I believe, and we've just recently updated those competencies in 2019. Recognizing the data on increasing mental health morbidity and mortality, this competency statement also included subspecialists. We heard from pediatric subspecialists at our annual leadership forum that they are very interested. They are often identifying mental health issues and need support around this. This report incorporated the new science on childhood adversity and social determinants. It has updates on the use of transdiagnostic approaches in pediatrics for emerging and subthreshold problems. And there's an accompanying technical report on training and preparing practices and training residents. And there's a revised algorithm really describing the process of integrating mental health care into pediatric practice. I'll show you that in a second. We really use the ACGME framework to discuss these competencies, and you can see there the framework around systems-based practice, patient care, medical knowledge, practice-based learning and improvement, interpersonal and communication skills, and professionalism. And the core competencies are broken into two big categories. This is a real brief description here, and I certainly encourage everybody in these new access programs to be aware of these mental health competencies that are there for pediatricians. So clinical skills include the promotion and primary prevention I mentioned earlier, secondary prevention, assessment, and treatment, the ability to apply fundamental communication skills, to apply common factor skills and common elements as treatments to initiate care. And then when a higher level of care is needed, to develop a plan with the practice care team or in collaboration with mental health specialists. There's very specific discussion about consultation and co-management in these competencies. And then practice enhancements to go along with that. Again, establishing these collaborative and consultative relationships. This is something that is really significantly needed, and it's so exciting that these access programs actually help build that. Build a practice team culture around shared commitment to embrace mental health care, establish systems to support mental health services, and then have ongoing use of quality improvement approaches so that the practice is able to address mental health issues in an improved way. So I'm sure you can read this from where you're sitting. So this is the new algorithm that has come with these competencies, and I just want to point out a couple of things. So we were mentioning about training in residency, and that mental health is not just a rotation that you do for a month or two. This is really talking about integrating mental health, a perspective on mental health, into all of pediatric practice. So you can see with that little oval number 1, this algorithm can start with a well visit, or over in oval number 5, perhaps it's a chronic care visit and those children, of course, are maybe at higher risk to have some mental health issues, or even an acute care visit to do a brief mental health update. And the algorithm walks folks through always including a psychosocial assessment, an initial psychosocial assessment, and then moving on to secondary screening, and then also working on how they plan to do that diagnostic assessment, building a team, and working with mental health professionals as appropriate. So Bright Futures guidelines, folks may be aware of these. On the left, you see the periodicity schedule with all its dots and all the visits that are preventive visits. And on the right is the Bright Futures guidelines, which really give priorities for the visit and age-specific detail on what should be the components of a visit. And here is a slightly larger size periodicity schedule from Bright Futures, and the arrows there on the left are pointing to the fact that there's a dot at every well visit for a psychosocial assessment, which can include social emotional screening or social determinants of health, ACEs, parental mental health. The second arrow is for adolescent depression screening, and the third arrow is for maternal depression screening recommended at infant well visits. So just in summary, these national recommendations now have been out there for some time, and pediatricians have growing awareness of these recommendations. So Bright Futures recommends the psychosocial assessment at every well visit, and they also ask pediatricians to ask about parental strengths and social determinants of health, which we know have a significance for family mental health. Our Screening and Practices project that I mentioned has been working with implementation at the practice and state level of social emotional screening and social determinants of health screening, screening for childhood adversity, and again then the AAP mental health psychosocial assessment and the new algorithm are recommending that we are assessing for social emotional development, social determinants, adversity at every well visit, and also doing a brief mental health update at acute or chronic. Professional, that was a statement by the AAP and ACAP, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, together. So there's great tools on that site. There's information on using motivational interviewing and videos of showing how that's done. And then there are these additional resources. There's the Chapter Action Toolkit, which was in the development of which we had support from MCHB and HRSA. There was a supplement to Pediatrics on mental health that was supported by SAMHSA. You can see the others here, the materials on trauma, resilience project, and then again that screening project, which is supported by the JPB Foundation. We do want to talk a little bit about the advocacy that the AAP has been involved in for child mental health care access programs. The AAP actually led a large group of stakeholders in advocating for the creation of this program through HRSA. You can see that list there. You may be able to read it if you have good eyesight. And the AAP continues to champion funding for this important program in Congress and is supported by many organizations. Several years ago, I had the great experience of working with our Federal Affairs Office and actually myself testifying on Capitol Hill for the importance of this way of doing consultation and collaboration for children's mental health. And then you can see other advocacy efforts that the AAP has consistently participated in, including the health parity, mental health parity work, the 21st Century Cures, etc. So a little bit about chapters. Again, you've heard really well from the folks in Virginia. And just some of our suggestions about collaborating with AAP chapters in this work. I know all of the programs need to recruit primary care clinicians to utilize the service, right? To be aware that it's there and to understand how it can be helpful to them in actually implementing mental health competencies in their practices. So again, identifying a chapter representative to serve on the program planning or oversight committee, or to have folks who would be willing to test for phases of implementation. I know in my state we're hoping to work with our AAP chapter to recruit pediatric practices as it expands, to present at chapter meetings and chapter teleconferences, et cetera. There are lots of ways to disseminate information and communicate with membership. You can certainly involve the chapter in the design of the program evaluation, or discuss this with the chapter pediatric council. Most chapters have a pediatric council that their whole focus is on working with payers to advocate for payment, of course, but also for coverage of various services for children. Other things that have been happening through the Academy are the Healthy People 2020 chapter grants. So you can see that the names of the chapters here who've been involved with various projects empowering families around mental health, substance use across the lifespan, and addressing social determinants of health. And these were made possible by donations to the AAP's Friends of Children Fund. If you're interested in finding out more information about your chapter in your district, this is just a screenshot of that spot on our website, so you can see who the executive director is and find out about the leadership of the boards of those chapters. And I think, oh good, we're going to have a few minutes for questions here. So some resources here. These are AAP policies that have really promoted the kind of work we've been doing around mental health competencies. So you can see that there are materials around early childhood and childhood adversity and toxic stress, substance use screening using SBIRT. The ADHD clinical practice guideline has just been updated, as was mentioned earlier, and the AAP has supported the guidelines for adolescent depression in primary care as documents for our membership. And then there are recent publications. I'll call your attention to the Mental Health Care of Children and Adolescents, a guide for primary care clinicians, and then Promoting Mental Health in Children and Adolescents, two recent textbooks. Also the Pediatric Psychopharmacology for Primary Care by Mark Riddle. Mark Riddle actually had helped with a section on the AAP mental health site with guidance for use of psychopharmacology by pediatricians and when to co-manage with a psychiatrist. And now there's a wonderful textbook to help primary care clinicians with that. We also have developed a quick reference guide to coding when pediatricians are seeing kids who have mental health issues, in the hopes that helping people understand how to code and receive payments to encourage them to engage in this work. Some other related websites for the AAP, we've had the Early Brain and Child Development website, information on poverty. We've had multiple statements around poverty and its impact on children's health and the family's health and well-being. There's a trauma toolbox and also the Resilience Project. And I think our next slide is our contact information. So there's my information there. And Linda Paul, who's our Senior Manager for Healthy Development and actually makes us all work for the Mental Health Leadership Work Group. Linda is a great resource. Then again, the website for our mental health. So I think we actually might have, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes for questions.
Yes, we sure do. Thank you so much, Dr. Earls. So we do have a little bit of time for questions, so please feel free to submit them in the Q&A pod. And we did already get a couple of submissions, so we'll start with a question from Kathy Karsting, really important question. One of the issues we hear raised about primary care increasing screening practices for all children is a lack of time. Can you share your perspective on this?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I spend a lot of my time working with practices on this issue. I think that time is often perceived to be a significant issue when people are doing screening, and I think part of that is that people really need to be prepared when they do screening. to know what their response to that screening is going to be. My colleague, R.J. Gillespie, who's a pediatrician in Oregon, who's done a tremendous amount of work around social determinants and adversity in childhood, when they did their project looking at screening, they actually found that the length of time of visits actually did not change. And in my experience, I've had physicians say doing screening actually has enhanced their visit in the sense that when they see the results of the screen, it helps direct the conversation of their visit rather than being about to leave the room and have the family say, oh, by the way, we need to talk about this too. So it has really helped people have it be a template for their conversation with families. I think the big challenge around mental health and around social determinants is it's often not immediately obvious to folks what their resources are or how to access resources. It's one of the very wonderful things about the Psychiatry Access Program that my colleagues at McPap that who I've gotten to know over the years have really been able to describe how it enhances pediatricians' confidence, right? That you have that resource to discuss if you've had a positive screen. So I really think that when people are given the support, that the time issue really kind of falls away as an issue for doing the screening.
Thank you. The next question is from Susan Griffin. She's asking if we're permitted to link to some of those AAP mental health resources on their own PMHCA websites.
Oh, I might need Linda to answer that question. Certainly, the materials that are on our AAP mental health website, all of those readiness materials, those are available. The toolkit, the mental health toolkit, when it is updated, is actually available for purchase. That has some more detail in it, but the website materials would be definitely available. If you're asking if you could put those on the site to link to, it would seem to me that would be okay, but I'm not the, I don't know if Linda is on here and can answer that question.
I do see that Linda is on the call, but I'm not sure if we can unmute her. Or Linda, you can also add a chat into the Q&A pod if you can answer that question.
Hi, this is Linda. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Linda.
Oh, okay, good. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think it's fine to link to those resources. I would suggest linking because we are, always looking to update them. So it's to make sure that they have the most up-to-date ones. It's preferred to link to the website.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, Linda. Thanks for chiming in. We have another question, Dr. Earls. Let's see, who is this one from? From Sandy Fritsch. She's asking if it would make sense to inform everyone about the mental health integration listserv that AAP is doing. She said the articles are great, and she often forwards them on to providers enrolled in her CPAP.
I'm sorry. I'm just clicking to expand the question because I want to. I know that ACAP is doing a mental health integration listserv. We do definitely on our mental health, aap.org mental health site have information and links to materials around integration, but I think the listserv is with ACAP. Am I correct on that, Linda?
No, I think what Dr. Fritsch is referring to is we have a mental health initiatives listserv, for which we periodically send out announcements and as well as some articles that have been published around children's mental health and substance use. And we can provide you with the page for those of you who wanted to join. We can send you the link, and it's just a matter of submitting your email address.
Thanks, Linda.
I didn't see any questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just was looking at our poll question about how many people are aware of the policy statement with competencies. Well, after I've just run my mouth all this time, I'm sure everybody's aware of it now, which is wonderful. And I definitely recommend that in your recruiting work with practices and so on that that you would share those competencies, because I think that would be very helpful for that collaborative work. Sorry, you were going to say something else.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yes, I do believe we did share the competencies with our PMHCA listserv. We're getting a lot of positive feedback from folks on the Q&A pod. If anyone has any other questions, because we do still have a couple of minutes, please feel free to submit. Oh, we do have another poll question up now. Are you working with your state AAP chapter?
Oh, that's wonderful. It looks really good. And I would say that if anybody needs support or an introduction to your AAP chapter folks, contacting myself or Linda would be glad to try to orchestrate that. But it looks like it's pretty widespread that folks are working with their chapter.
Yeah, I do think we all really recognize that AAP is such a critical partner for our program.
I see that Jerry Mattson is asking if people are working with their family medicine chapter, and that would also be a really good suggestion. We have had in North Carolina, we've had really great interest from our family medicine colleagues on the early childhood screening, the maternal depression screening, and figuring out how to collaborate with mental health professionals.
And another comment from Jerry about, and how about their family health-to-health information centers in their states or family support networks?
Yeah, I think involvement of families in this work is really excellent. They help keep you from making mistakes in implementation of various things that you want to implement. That's been my experience. But I think the other thing is that family members can also be a driver with their primary care clinician to say that they would like for that consultation to happen with their pediatric visits, so they can be a real ally in the advocacy piece of it.
Great, thank you. So it looks like we are at the end of our time today, but perfect timing. Thank you so much, Dr. Earls, for your presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak out with our awardees today on AAP's current work, on the wonderful resources that are available, and also, of course, on ways to further engage with AAP. And also, thank you for sharing your contact information so our awardees can reach out to you. I did want to share before we break that we have uploaded the slides for day 2. They're now available in the download pod. And because it is now 12:15, it's time for a quick 15-minute break. We invite you to grab your lunch, or for our colleagues in Alaska, for breakfast. Please feel free to eat during the next session, where we will have 4 of our awardees presenting on lessons learned. So please return in 15 minutes by 12:30 Eastern Time, and we'll start promptly then. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. This is Lauren Ramos from the Division of MCH Workforce Development, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to this afternoon's session on lessons learned. And just want to make sure that my audio is working.
Yes, it sounds great.
Oh, okay, excellent. So I had a little connectivity issue of my own. So it's been so exciting to be part of this meeting with all of you and learn more about your programs. And I think this afternoon session will really add to that as we learn more about some lessons learned across 4 states today. So I hope you were able to get a snack or a lunch, or like me, you got another cup of coffee, and you can sit back and listen to our wonderful presenters share more about overviews of their states and be able to reflect on their lessons learned from the first year. So the format for this session is we will hear briefly from our presenters from 4 states, and then I'll lead a panel discussion. And following that, we should be able to have some time for some additional questions. So I will first briefly introduce our wonderful panel, and their full bios, as you know, are available to you. I'm going to be giving the abbreviated version so that we have enough time for the overview of their programs and discussion. And I am sure you are looking forward to hearing from them as much as I am. So let me welcome and introduce presenters from Maryland, North Carolina, Missouri, and Michigan. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Kelly Coble. Kelly is the Program Director of the Maryland Behavioral Health Integration in Pediatric Primary Care. Kelly's professional area of focus is enhancing access to high-quality behavioral health services for children, parents, and families, particularly in underserved and rural populations. Kelly has extensive experience over the past 15 years providing evidence-based treatment to children and families in traditional clinical settings via mental health consultation, as well as embedded clinical services within community-based settings. This foundation of clinical knowledge and expertise has enabled her to spearhead the development of local and statewide workforce development initiatives for behavioral health clinicians. Next, we'll hear from Kendra Rosa. Kendra is the Director for Clinical Administration in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Duke University School of Medicine. In this role, she supports clinical services and operations with a specific focus on child and family mental health. Kendra received her MPH from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, from the Department of Maternal and Child Health. Kendra serves as a program manager for the North Carolina Telehealth Partnership for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Access and the Duke Site Manager for the North Carolina Maternal Mental Health Matters for making access to treatment, evaluation, resources, and screening programs. Not explicitly in her bio, because she let us know that she is a maternal and child health graduate from UNC. I'd like to welcome her as a former MCHB trainee, so we're happy that you're still part of one of our programs. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Gary Maslow, who is an Assistant Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and an Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at the Duke University School of Medicine. He's the co-chief of the Division of Child and Family Mental Health in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the Medical Director for both Pediatric Mental Health and Integrated Behavioral Health Programs for Duke University Health Center. Dr. Maslow is a general pediatrician and child and adolescent psychiatrist with training in public health who conducts research on interventions for adolescents with childhood onset chronic conditions. He is a practicing primary care pediatrician, and he's been a caller to the North Carolina Matters call line for advice regarding his own patients. Then we'll hear from Wendy L. Wendy is the Executive Director of the Missouri Child Psychiatry Access Project and oversees all of the daily operations and strategic growth of the project. Ms. L is a registered occupational therapist with over 20 years of experience working in healthcare, specifically in children's mental health, and she is housed out of the University of Missouri Department of Psychiatry. Last, we'll hear from Deborah Pinels.
Deborah is the Medical Director of Behavioral Health and Forensic Programs for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the Director of the Program in Psychiatry, Law, Ethics, and the Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Michigan Medical School and Clinical Adjunct Professor at the University of Michigan Law School. Dr. Peinel's roles have included serving as the Assistant Commissioner of Forensic Services, as well as the Interim State Medical Director for the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. She has worked in outpatient, inpatient settings, forensic and correctional facilities, emergency rooms, and court clinics, has received public service awards, and has been an expert witness in many cases. She is board certified in psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, and addiction medicine. Wow, what an awesome panel. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the state overviews. And we will start with you, Kelly, providing an overview of the Maryland Behavioral Health Integration in Pediatric Primary Care Program.
Hello. I want to be sure everyone can hear me, and I successfully unmuted.
Yes,
We've had to learn how to navigate, all of us, a number of web-based learning tools over the last few weeks. So I'm pleased that I tackled another one successfully. Thanks for inviting me to join and to represent Maryland. So I'll give a quick overview and then look forward to speaking to more of the specific questions. So Maryland BHIP has been around since 2012. We piloted in 2012 and went statewide in 2013. And as a child psychiatry access program, we have some of the same core elements that you've heard from other programs over the last day and a half. So our bread and butter service is the phone line. So primary care providers across the state can call and get access to behavioral health consultation from child psychiatrists or other experts in behavioral health concerns Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And just like you've heard from other states, free of charge and regardless of the patient's insurance status. In addition to that, we offer assistance with resource and referral connections. So we maintain a database of all of the behavioral health services and other resources that might support kids and families with behavioral health needs across all of Maryland's counties. So we're staffed by child behavioral health clinicians. So typically that is 2 FTEs of a clinical social worker or counselor who is able to hear from the pediatrician about what a child might need. So maybe an 11-year-old who needs to be connected with a therapist for CBT in a rural county in Maryland, and we provide that information back within 24 hours. And we get into all the nitty-gritties that we know are really hard to navigate in the system of care. So, you know, which bus line you need to take and what the hours are that they do evaluations, you know, on a Wednesday between 2 and 4, and the wait is a couple weeks out or whatever those details are. So we assist with resource and referrals. We provide training and education to primary care providers, and we tailor that to the needs of the site. So we'll come and do that in office. And then we also do, as you've heard a lot of programs discuss, that we have ongoing events throughout the year where we'll put on half-day CME events that rotate throughout the year. And then something unique to Maryland is that we co-locate social work interns into primary care practices. It's not something that we only do, but it's something that we're particularly proud of in our state. So we have 16 interns that are placed in regionally specific sites that started in 2012 on the eastern shore of Maryland, and we've expanded it into a western part of our state. And then now we're working with Morgan State University to bring that to Baltimore City. And then this year, we've been working with the HRSA funding to expand our telepsychiatry services. So we have piloted with 3 practices in particularly underserved areas of our state and rural regions. We've piloted telepsychiatry consultation, and we're working to expand our direct telepsychiatry services as well as telemental health services, telecare coordination, and then we also have launched Project ECHO across the state. So initially we'll do that in 3 rural regions, so Western Maryland, the Lower Eastern Shore, and Southern Maryland, and then we'll be expanding that across the state. So that is a quick overview of the services we offer, and I look forward to speaking to a more specific question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to move now to North Carolina and hear more about the telehealth partnership for child and adolescent psychiatry access. So, Kendra or Dr. Maslow?
Oh, this is so I think I am now I'm unmuted. It sounds like, sorry about that. So Kendra and I are excited the opportunity to be a part of the panel, and I can provide a brief overview of the program, and then look forward to the discussion. Our program in North Carolina is called for the telephone line is called the North Carolina Psychiatry Access Line, or NCPAL, and it's part of a broader with the HRSA grant funding, a broader coalition that we're calling North Carolina Treatment Program for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Access. And like many of the other programs, it has a pretty broad set of goals, but it's certainly newer. We started with in 6 counties in 2018, and then since with the HRSA funding, have been able to expand with the goal of going statewide over the last 2 years. And as of now, have had calls from 20 counties across North Carolina. I think one of the goals that we have is, as we look at all the different states, has been to kind of think of what our model would be. Is it a Massachusetts model where there are disseminated hubs, or is it more the Michigan model? I think you'll hear about later, or Washington, where there are more central resources. So I think one of our goals, I think, in being a part of this panel is thinking about that process that we're still actively in, and weighing the pros and cons of being more centrally located versus more having a program that has hubs across the state. North Carolina is actually the second largest rural population of any state, and so it's a very rural state, even though there are some major population hubs. And so really addressing kind of the rural community is one of our focuses. We have a strong partnership with our Title V agency that is where the HRSA grant is located, and have been partnering with the state mental health group as well in terms of thinking about what our model will be going forward. At this point, we have basically a child psychiatrist available and a behavioral health consultant available 8 to 5 every day, and are receiving calls from a range of practices. We also are doing practice outreach and have, from an educational side, are getting trained to do the REACH Institute training, and had a REACH training for 25 pediatricians this summer, and are hoping to, and have been trained, or are being in the process of being trained to be REACH trainers, so that we can have more REACH Institute trainings. The REACH Institute is a 3-day intensive behavioral health course for primary care providers for kids, and then an ongoing 6-month case consultation discussion format. In addition to HRSA support for NCPAL, the pediatric side, we also, North Carolina has received one of the maternal grants, and so it's interesting for us to basically be launching the maternal and perinatal side, in concert with the pediatric side. And so in partnership with UNC and also the state, we're a part of that process, and thinking about when we do outreach to pediatric practices. At this point, we're recruiting them in family medicine. We're recruiting them both for support of the kids, but also for support of the parents, which I think has been quite a nice intersection. I think the advent and the experience with COVID-19 has moved us rapidly forward in terms of our ability to do video assessments. And so as part of responding to the current crisis, we have been doing more video, or started to do video assessments. So pediatricians may identify someone who needs a one-time consultation, and in the past you might have brought them in person with the goal of eventually moving to being able to do a remote video assessment. But certainly in response to this crisis, where we've rapidly shifted to be able to do video visits, it's been something we've also incorporated into the NCPAL program. So overall, we're at the beginning with in 20 counties with the goal of going statewide. have a really great team that includes psychiatrists, psychologists, pediatricians, social workers, public health staff, and the partnerships with the state, and are, I think, in that process of working with the state and with other stakeholders to discover and decide on what is our North Carolina model. So hopefully that will be something that we've heard more about models through this process, and look forward to sharing that experience.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that overview. A lot going on. Let's move now to Wendy and learn a little bit more about the Missouri Child Psychiatry Access Project. Wendy, you'll need to unmute your phone. So it's *6 if you can do that to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you can. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, for some reason I was doing *6 and it wasn't working. Good morning, everyone. So I'm happy to be here. So a little background about the Missouri Child Psychiatry Access Project is we received our pilot funding from the Missouri Foundation for Health in 2018, and that funding extends through 2021. We started as a phased pilot implementation focusing in 2 regions of our state, the eastern region, which is St. Louis, Missouri, and the surrounding counties in July 2018, and then we extended our pilot to the central region, which is Columbia, Missouri, and the surrounding counties in April of 2019. The HRSA funding provided us the capacity to expand to include televideo consultations, enhanced follow-up services for referred families, and to be able to take our project statewide beginning this year. A few, the main components or key program activities of most CPAP, as we refer to ourselves, are telephonic psychiatry consultations, follow-up care coordination, and behavioral health educational opportunities, as well as a robust evaluation system. Our current program status is we have 5 child and adolescent psychiatrists that each provide consultation services 1 day a week for the project, Monday through Friday, and we operate 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. And we have 1 full-time follow-up care coordinator that connects families to behavioral health resources and provides ongoing support for up to 90 days. We currently have 288 enrolled primary care providers statewide. We've received approximately 410 consultation calls through our line, and we are serving 17 families currently in follow-up. And our statewide phase implementation began in March 2020, and we expect to be fully activated statewide by October 2020. A few of our collaborative partners that I'd like to mention is the Missouri Department of Mental Health, the University of Missouri Department of Psychiatry, the Assessment Resource Center, and then we have partnered with the Missouri Telehealth Network as well. And further collaborative partners include the Behavioral Health Network of Greater St. Louis, Behavioral Health Response, and NAMI. Both our statewide chapter and St. Louis have been strong collaborative partners. And finally, the Washington University Pediatric and Adolescent Ambulatory Research Consortium, which I hope to talk more about later, have been a really strong collaborative partner for us. If I could just mention a few program highlights, is that we have successfully developed a strong multidisciplinary steering committee in both our pilot regions that help us monitor our pilot's progress, help refine our measurable outcomes, and recommend implementation refinement. And in addition, we started a quarterly statewide steering committee in 2020. And we have built a sustainable evaluation system using REDCap, and we continue to develop systemic improvements to data collection and analysis. And another key success is our strong collaboration across multiple agencies and service providers, including universities, state agencies, private sector and nonprofit organizations that have really helped us develop our workflow to address system-level challenges in our day-to-day operations. And another key success and next steps kind of for our project is we are really focusing on sustainability work, and we've established 3 sub-work groups that are working for sustainability of the project, and those work groups are a legislative group, an insurance group, and then a potential to study other funding streams. And we have very strong, committed statewide partners at the table, including our Missouri Medicaid or Mo Health Net, Title V, and the Missouri Primary Care Association. And we started sending out post-call documentation summaries as a project, which has been highly successful. And that follows after each consultation. They get a written summary of the consultation, and we will be following that with care coordination summaries next month. And lastly, I'd like to mention a pilot that we are working on to support endocrinology specialty providers in the St. Louis area as they treat type 1 diabetes and address behavioral health concerns in children. So it's a little overview, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about our challenges a little bit later on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So last, we'll hear a quick overview of the Michigan Child Care Collaborative Connect, or MC3 Connect. I love that name. So Dr. Finals?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here on this panel representing MC3 Connect, which really, I'm just one person in a team of many. It's a fantastic project that's been in Michigan for a while and has been able to be expanded through the HRSA funding. Essentially, there was a recognition in Michigan many years ago of the national public health problem of having children and youth not being able to access child psychiatrists. We all know that from today's discussion. And so the Michigan Child Collaborative Care Program, which we fondly refer to as MC3, was stood up initially in 2012 through private foundation funding and Medicaid match grants. And that's the funding that was continued for about 3 years until we had a Mental Health and Wellness Commission, which added some funds, as well as some of our situation that we had in Flint, Michigan, which I'm sure everybody had heard about in the national news. We were able to get some additional funding for Flint. And so we had little by little expanded the child psychiatry access through those funding streams, and then when the HRSA grant became available, we expanded to call our project MC3 Connect, partly because what this allowed us to do was build our project and our work and our activities to a statewide service. So essentially we provide child and adolescent psychiatrists and child and adolescent and perinatal psychiatrists to over 2,000 providers across the state of Michigan. MC3 Connect allows us to add phone-based telepsychiatric and group case consultations and a behavioral health consultant who's out in the regions to support all 83 Michigan counties and to 70 school-based child and adolescent health centers, including up in the frontier areas of our Upper Peninsula and to tribal populations. We're also working to educate providers and trainees by developing a series of culturally sensitive and content-relevant webinars based on requested topics, which has been a really interesting process, especially as topics continue to evolve in our world, as our world continues to evolve. And we're also linking our MC3 Connect activities to various evidence-based intervention supports and working in collaboration with our lead partners, which are University of Michigan and Michigan State University. MC3 started with University of Michigan, and then MC3 Connect brought in the child and adolescent and pediatric behavioral health team at Michigan State University, and we've had fantastic partnerships across the board. And we're also integrating screening and referral into our workflow process to help identify youth who might have additional behavioral health needs. Essentially, the way we operationalize all of the activities across the state is that we coordinate with an advisory committee that meets on a quarterly basis, as well as partners meetings that meet on a regular basis, where we review whatever new issues are emerging, challenges and the like. At the advisory meeting, we have several different stakeholders representing all sorts of different voices who are able to give us guidance and help steer the course to maximize the reach to as many practitioners as possible, and to provide that child and adolescent and perinatal psychiatric access. We have received tremendous support from within the state government and also from outside in terms of stakeholders. We work closely with the Michigan chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they participate, as do many others, parenting groups and youth, and that's been really also a way to for us to achieve the success that we feel we've been achieving. There's clearly more work to do. There's clearly more need out there, and with COVID-19, there's probably even more need. And so we're tackling some of those problems as they unfold. But that's a brief overview of our Michigan project.
Excellent, terrific. It's nice to hear just some of the similarities and the differences across your four, which I'm sure if we heard from everyone right now, we'd get a lot of the same and the nuances for each state. So let's jump into the panel questions, and I'll go through for the first round in the order that you started, so you're not caught off guard. So the first question is, what are your program's top 2 lessons learned? So this is a lessons learned panel, so let's jump right into it. And Kelly, can we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think we heard everybody sort of mention the importance of collaboration, and I think also communication, and I would imagine most programs share the fact that we are all made up of multiple universities or institutions. That's certainly true for us at BHIP. Our funding comes through the Department of Health, Behavioral Health Administration. I'm housed at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. We also have Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Salisbury University School of Social Work, Morgan State School of Social Work. So as all of us know well, when you have a lot of institutions coming together, it would be easy for challenges to arise. I think something we've learned over the years, and certainly with the newly added HRSA funding, developing mechanisms for consistent and constant communication really helps the work move forward. So I think some small examples that we implemented in the beginning of our project and we've evolved over time is we put out a weekly update that is only intended for our internal team and also our funders. So initially that was our Behavioral Health Administration. We call it This Week in BHIP, and we use it as a way to sort of keep each other up to date. There are lots of, and folks have mentioned examples of this, sort of subsets of our team, folks that might be working on, I think Wendy mentioned like an insurance subgroup or a legislative group. We have folks that are dedicated to evaluation or maybe the clinical work. So we put it out to keep all of us on the same page, and we also use it as a way to have back and forth communication with our funders and also key stakeholders. So we have tried to find ways to have constant and frequent communication, and that has been particularly useful in a time like this when we have all of a sudden a really unexpected change like we have now with COVID-19, where we can be sure everybody is up to date on maybe new program offerings or new developments. So I think that's been really important for us. And then I'll give an example of something really down to a logistical detail, is that we have constantly found that our providers, the PCPs we work with, also like communication, but in specific ways. So we recently did environmental scan, preparing for the rollout of new services, and our providers still like to get faxes. So we've talked about that, I know, with Kara and on our JBS call, that so we've invested in secure HIPAA compliant fax service to make it easier on our team, and we find we get better response when we fax. So there's, I guess, two examples of something kind of bigger picture and then a very specific nitty-gritty example, and we've applied that across. We also have an addiction consultation service that we launched in 2017. So we've used that to apply across other programs to sort of save us reinventing the wheel, because we're still faxing, and it helps us with engagement and responsiveness for our providers.
Those are great. Good communications, both lessons learned and tips for others. So thanks for sharing those. Let's move to North Carolina. What are your top lessons learned? You may still be on mute.
Good afternoon. This is Kendra. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Kendra.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so one, we have certainly learned lessons and are continuing to learn lessons as we implement our program, starting from the initial pilot, as Gary described, and moving into the current phase funded by HRSA. And I think one of our main lessons has been just the importance of really being patient and persistent in the face of change, in terms of change both externally in the context of our state, and also as our team has fluctuated over time. And we've been just so incredibly fortunate to have a team that is skilled and thoughtful and able to be flexible as we've been responding to changes. So I can't emphasize enough just the importance of having really a strong team and good communication amongst team members. In addition to that, we have also been fortunate to have wonderful relationships across the state with different stakeholders who have been invested in this program as a pilot, and now as it grows, building on that external team with additional stakeholders and partners in rolling out the work. And I think Gary's going to speak a little bit more to our external stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you, Kendra. I think the idea of, as we're reflecting on this question, it seems like the team that Kendra's built and really nurtured, and the communication internally then has helped us, I think, have different people who are able to reach out to different organizations and have the same message and the same kind of communication. And I think that that process of cohesion within, and then allows us to have different people who can communicate externally and have really a shared goal. North Carolina has had, prior to COVID-19, a fairly complex set of changes that are occurring around healthcare, and so both major insurers are heading towards value-based care with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then a Medicaid transformation project that was underway but has also been delayed. And so in the context of a really rapidly changing healthcare environment, the partnerships that we've had with the state, both with the Women and Children's section within the Department of Health and Human Services. I think Jerry Matson has been on that. Marion Earls, who's and obviously been involved is a North Carolinian and has been incredibly helpful in terms of partnering. And then certainly Jerry Matson and the others in the Department of Public Health, and then also our mental health services. So there's kind of the state government piece, and then across the, as people have spoken to, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Family Practice Academy, and the North Carolina Psychiatric Association has also been a champion. I think that is another part of this, is how to bring in the other child psychiatrists and other mental health workforce that can be a partnership for us. So certainly the clear value of partnership, I think, has been a theme of this meeting, and one that we really, I think we've tried to embrace in the context of a really rapidly changing environment. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So broad partnerships and really thinking about champions. Those are good lessons learned. So Wendy, let's go to you and hear a little bit more about Missouri. You might need to try your *6 again too. So Wendy, we're not hearing you. If it's okay, I'm gonna, we'll come back to you. We'll go to Michigan just so we can keep things moving. So I'm wondering, Dr. Finals, if you can jump in.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of lessons learned, gosh, there's a lot of new ones again with the COVID environment. But I would say the first lesson that we've learned is around our data collection and reporting. You know, one of the advantages and challenges, I would say, of the HRSA funding is that it does kind of have us really look at what data might be helpful to understand what we're doing and the impact of what we're doing. So that's created the need to learn some lessons about who's collecting the data, how's it going to be stored, who has access to it, and then how do we make sure that as the data is being collected across sites that it's, you know, accurately defined and, you know, sort of doing that data cleaning. I'm sorry, there's just a little background noise. Hopefully you can hear me. The second lesson that we've learned is that we found it very important to bring in youth and parent representatives to help them understand the importance of their voice, how to contribute and be on the advisory committee, and for us to be able to hear what they have to say. And they've been able to make some excellent suggestions to us about, for example, topics as we're spreading out, you know, the next gen training and educational initiatives and linkages. There's been just some very good back and forth around what is needed from the perspective of parent representatives as well as youth. And we have both were identified from the Association of Children's Mental Health here in Michigan, and they've just been fantastic partners to the whole initiative. And so that was another good lesson that we learned.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see, Wendy, if we can get back to you and hear from you now.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can, and let me say before you answer, I'm going to start, don't mute after you answer this question because I'm going to have you start with the next one, okay?
Okay, great. So lessons learned from Missouri is one, I think, significant one is that it takes time to build utilization. Overcoming some of the barriers that were brought up actually in the AAP presentation is we've seen workflow challenges, hesitancy to initiate mental health treatment, and a general lack of baseline mental health knowledge have been some of the barriers that we have encountered that have been more significant. At the beginning of our project, we had the good fortune to be mentored by both Dr. Strauss and Dr. Sarvet, and the best piece of advice that Dr. Strauss gave us was to look for those barriers and obstacles to utilization and make those our project priorities, which a shout out to my great team. I feel that that's one of the our big focuses have been looking at those barriers and how we can address those. And second, most I think significant lesson learned is the importance of relationships. We have seen buy-in amongst our providers increase with their ability to build relationships with our psychiatry team. And we have done this through psychiatry meet and greets and including them in provider meetings. And for several months this last year, one of our psychiatrists traveled on-site weekly to meet with PCP offices. And not only were these providers able to ask their burning behavioral health questions, but most importantly, this contributed to building trust and relationship building, which lends itself to a lot of credibility and utilization of the project.
Excellent. I think I've heard, is there another one? I'm sorry. Well, across all of the responses, we definitely heard common themes about investing in the partnerships, the importance of the stakeholders, the regular communication, and even finding different strategies to communicate. So those are great. So now we're going to have an opportunity for all of you to brag a little bit too, and hear about something that's gone really well, whether it's an innovation or something that surprised you that went really well, or something that you've come up with or that you're just most proud of. So Wendy, I'm hopeful we can start with you.
Okay, great. I think one of the most anticipated successes was that we had higher than anticipated enrollment targets in our pilot regions. We set benchmarks, and we just well exceeded. So enrollment has been very robust. And I would say, going back to our steering, our advisory committee, it has been such a success for our project that we have organized a really diverse group of stakeholders that have been significant to elevating the goals and objectives of our programs. They weigh in on the key deliverables, and they provide the project advisement. And as I said, we have 2 ongoing pilots that meet monthly, and then we come together quarterly as a statewide steering committee. So I think that's been a real success. And lastly, touching on the Washington University Practice Consortium relationship, when our project began, they developed a mental health QI project that really aligned itself really well with the goals of our project and has really supported the utilization. As a matter of fact, their mantra is that our project is their lifeline for those providers enrolled in that QI project. So that's been 3 of the successes that I think are things that have gone really well with our project.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those. So let's go to North Carolina and tell us something you're proud of or some successes or innovations.
Hi, I'm slow with the *6. But we have been really encouraged by the fact that once our providers start calling the line, they continue calling. I think, as Wendy mentioned, having every provider across the state is in a different place in terms of their comfort level with treating mental health in the primary care setting. But once we have engaged providers, they continue to call. So we're just thrilled about that and are looking forward to continuing to build on those successes. We have had creative ways to engage providers. One of them is we've gone on these donut tours where we have driven across the state with boxes of donuts and dropped into practices to get to know people and start building. Obviously, right now we're not driving around with donuts, but we have we're about to roll out kind of COVID-19 office hours where we'll be 1-2 times a week for an hour, have an open Zoom meeting so that providers can drop in and ask questions and get to know us and start to get some of that engagement in the program in a virtual setting. I think that we have been really thoughtful, and our data team is just amazing in building data structures to collect the data as required by HRSA, and also to build on our sustainability plan to help the program continue to be sustainable beyond the scope of this funding. And I think Gary, anything else you're seeing to add? Yeah, I think those are our main bragging points. Thank you.
Excellent. I think I could use a donut tour about now in 30 days at home. So, but that sounds like a great strategy. So let's go back to Michigan. Dr. Pinels, tell us a little bit more about something you're proud of.
So, we already had an infrastructure set up with, as I had mentioned before, with our original MC3, but we knew that we needed to reach other regions of the state, and so we're really proud. We have, up in our Upper Peninsula and what we call the thumb region of our state. If you look at our state, and if you don't know the mitten analogy to Michigan, there's part of it that looks like the thumb, and those are hard to reach areas, and so we're proud of being able to stand up some supports in those regions. Also, our University of Michigan partners have been able to provide training to the behavioral health consultants in sales and marketing so that they're able to increase their outreach efforts to the primary care providers and therefore increase enrollment in MC3 Connect in their region. Because it really does take a lot of marketing, and you don't want it to be seen as just one more thing. You want it to be seen as really useful and helpful. And then also we've been able to schedule and conduct several educational activities that we're very proud of on topics that people identified as being really important, like things about agitation and aggression in children, managing autism concerns, diagnosing perinatal anxiety. We've also set up conferences, again, in these regions like in Flint and up in the Upper Peninsula that we were able to talk about opioid use in perinatal women, safe and effective strategies in treating depression in youth. We have done some grand rounds. Our team, our psychiatrist colleagues have done grand rounds to reach those next-gen providers, like on youth suicide. Topics included youth suicide and safety planning, which is always relevant. And then we have been doing work on cultural humility training for the behavioral health consultants and continue to look at how to do that post-COVID-19, and that'll be able to be done virtually, which is really important for our Native populations here. And the other thing that we're really proud of is how well our team works together, especially, the behavioral health consultants. They lean on each other and rely on each other, and there's just a lot of mutual support, and that's really helpful as they face challenges reaching out to the community of providers and borrow ideas from each other. So it's been a very nice collaborative spirit all across the board.
Those are some really rich examples. I love hearing the reach into vulnerable populations and then really thinking about the next generation and the pipeline of providers too. That's great. So Kelly, tell us a little bit more about some things you're proud of in Maryland.
Sure. I will say already I'm excited to bring back the idea of a donut tour because we are always motivated by kind of food, and we like to bring that to our providers too. So like Michigan, we had an existing program to build upon, and something that is always wonderful is how eager our team is and how open they are to new ideas. So that has to be sort of top of the list of things that I'm excited to brag about. So as we've kind of jumped into this kind of BHIP reboot, you might call it, it's been fun to work collaboratively as a group to think about how we might kind of re-energize BHIP, what components we're adding, and the group has been wonderful and really willing to do that. But I think top of mind are the ways we've responded over these last weeks to COVID-19. So something that folks have been wonderful about across the whole team and the various institutions I've mentioned is that everyone really pivoted on a dime. And as most of you listening probably have done, we were able to get up a COVID-19 dedicated page on our website, put out very quickly a newsletter for our listserv so that providers had handy resources to provide to their patients. And then in addition to the echo that we're hosting, we decided instead of modifying our echo that we would add an additional web-based educational offering that we're calling BHIP Resilience Breaks. So this has been something that was really well responded to. Our first series, I think session, we had just over 70 providers attend, and we have another one coming up next week. So we're focusing these sessions really on how providers can support the children and families that they're seeing in their practices. So the first one we talked about sort of how to manage the new schedule of probably working at home and having kids that you're schooling at home. We're going to talk about how to talk with children around COVID-19 and potentially some of the trauma and grief that comes with that. And then we'll have a session on taking care of yourself, kind of provider resilience and self-care. And we'll be extending that series sort of on as we need to. So that's been something that we're focused on right now, obviously, as all of us are and are particularly proud of as a team. And then another new effort that we rolled out as part of this sort of BHIP reboot is that we did an environmental scan. So if you're familiar with Maryland, you know that we have a lot of kind of urban and also suburban areas in the center part of our state. And then out in the western part of our state, we're very mountainous and rural. And then down in the southern part of our state, where the Chesapeake Bay kind of splits up the middle, there are very rural areas down there with lots of farming communities and folks that are watermen. And so we're focusing on those three areas, that very western part and the two lower rural areas of our state initially. And we focused there on an environmental scan. And like Michigan, since we had an existing program, we know a lot of our providers very well. We thought, a lot of these practices are engaged with us. So something that we've been really proud of and pleased with is this sort of re-energizing around engagement with BHIP. New providers are joining practices all the time. So we saw a real uptick in our enrollment with BHIP. We asked providers to sign up with us, and we saw a huge jump, particularly in the southern Maryland region, which is on the western side of the Chesapeake Bay, as we had some launch events there, and we were conducting the environmental scan. We did a Saturday training in preparation for this new ECHO series we're hosting. So that was something we've been really proud of, and it's helped energize the team. We also saw a lot of energy around sending our consultants to the Project ECHO training. So Dr. Mark Riddle, you heard Dr. Earls mention him. We're fortunate to have him as one of our consultants. He and some of our other physicians went to New Mexico and got trained, and that also has brought some new energy into the group, and it's been fun to watch that and folks innovate, thinking about the type of content we want to be delivering to PCPs. So those are some things we're focused on now and are pretty proud of.
That's great. All of you have so much to be proud of, and I'm sure all of our states do. I can't wait to hear a little bit more about all of the great examples shared. So we'll close our panel with one last question, one that I know we all spend a lot of time on, and that's the challenges that we face. And so I'm hopeful that each of you can share one or two significant challenges that you faced, and if you've been able to work towards resolving them, the strategies that you've used to tackle those challenges. And so North Carolina, I think it's your turn to start.
Okay, that's great. I think from our perspective, the biggest challenges relate, I think, to kind of the external environment and just being in a fairly geographically diverse state and one that has urban and rural centers. Really, what is our model? I think being relatively new, having kind of this mixed geography has been challenging to figure out where do we want to land, and do we want to have a system that is more centralized versus more disseminated. And I think the exciting part of that challenge is that we can kind of say, here's kind of the Massachusetts model, here's the Michigan model, here's the Washington model. We've been referring to those models a lot and have slides where that's basically what we lay out for our stakeholders and kind of talk about the pros and cons of these different models. So, so I would say that the challenge of kind of determining what a new statewide program should look like in a very rapidly changing state healthcare environment has been very challenging. But the partnerships that we've had with the state, with our other stakeholders, with folks like experts like Marian, and advice from John and others, has really been exciting to be a part of. So, so hopefully we'll arrive at our final model and have continued success and support. But it is a pretty challenging process to move from a small pilot in 6 counties to something that's statewide.
Yeah, thank you yeah, no, thanks for, I think it's hard for everyone to be open about their challenges, but I know we can all learn from them, so thanks for sharing that. So Wendy, can we go back to you and hear about any challenges and potential solutions in Missouri?
Yes. As I mentioned, remote enrollment has been robust for the project, but getting providers to utilize the service, remember that we're there, has been challenging as a new program. We have some what we call super users, but some enrolled providers have used us only rarely, others not at all. So that was a little bit of an unexpected challenge. When we introduced the project to our pilot sites, we were kind of informed that our phone lines would be kept constantly busy, but that has not been the case. But despite these challenges, I'm happy to report that our utilization is hovering about 40%. So as a new project, we're fairly happy with those numbers, but we always seek to, improve utilization and break down any barriers to providers accessing our service. And another challenge that we encountered in year one is that we, as we were working to start delivering these post-call documentation summaries to providers, we encountered a lot of legal and some liability concerns. This was something that took us about a year to really work through. So what we really worked on was referencing Missouri case law in reference to providing that documentation to providers. And we really worked strongly with our legal team. As a result, I think we came out a lot stronger as a project as a result of all of that work in year one. And some really significant, we relied on other projects that really gave us guidance, specifically on disclaimer language that focused on us being an educational consult line and the limits of our ability to support providers in the treatment of children and adolescents as a result of our project. So I feel like those were some significant ones in year one that we continue to address, and the legal, I feel that we really resolved that, and as I said, I think we're stronger as a result of that work.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So Kelly, let's go back to you and hear about Maryland challenges.
So most of the challenges we have encountered really, I feel like, have come from sort of procedural issues like delay in the release of funds. So we are funded through the Behavioral Health Administration still. So the HRSA funds came through our state and then to us. And as I'm sure many folks are familiar with, it just that adds to the timeline. So we ran into those sorts of issues because until funds are released, we can't hire staff. So there were little bumps like that along the way that have been challenging. And then we have still had challenges hiring, like for one of our positions for a care coordinator. Being within a large university comes with its own challenges. I imagine if we were in a room together, I would see some like smiles or kind of winces because there are lots of, rules around job postings and job classifications and how long jobs can be posted. So those types of barriers have existed, which is true for any position or contract. So those types of things that are some beyond our control, most of those we know how to navigate and can be patient with. And we've just had to sort of shift folks around who can help and fill in for those positions. Those have been our biggest barriers. Again, I imagine if we were in person, I would see some nods, I hope, because I think other university-based folks have run into those too. But that's been most of it for us.
Thank you. I have a feeling all of these challenges are common challenges across the program. So last, let's hear about Michigan. And Dr. Pinels, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and it is, affirming to hear from others about some of the challenges. So, I think for us, we have a few. Again, I had already mentioned some of the data challenges that we had. But also, we have to remind ourselves a lot about roles and responsibilities of all the partners, because there are so many partners, and we want to make sure that, that people aren't tripping over each other and that we've got assignments of tasks, which is why our partners meeting is really helpful, so that we, meet regularly and communicate well and make sure that things get done in the way that we need them to. It's also a challenge to recruit new providers that we are hoping to consult with. Getting past the practice managers and enrolling providers in the consultation service and helping them understand the benefits of the availability of child, adolescent, perinatal psychiatrists has been, as much as we know that it's a great service, sometimes hard to get that across. Also, the providers often feel like the child and adolescents that they're serving should be getting their services through psychiatric services outside of the practice. So there's been this, there's sometimes this tension of, what is manageable or not manageable within a primary care practice. And then there's worries about liability, especially if there's risk issues involved, and that becomes part of the consultation discussion about whether, with the consultation, the primary care providers can really support the youth. And that's been important, but also, I think, a challenge. There's a lot that's been developed in the first 2 years, so things that we wish maybe we had done differently. It might be to redo our work plan. We have a work plan for what kind of webinars we wanted in the first 2 years, but the timeline didn't really account for all the things that could come up in the community in all subsequent years. And so, spreading some of those out across time might have been better. And of course, nobody could anticipate COVID. And so, thinking about what that meant into some way of, reshuffling the deck periodically would be things that we would want to adapt or improve as we go. We want to have, in terms of next steps and strategies that we want to adapt to improve our outreach and engagement. We're thinking about having a table, and I don't know how to, we're sort of figuring out how to do that with the Michigan Association of Pediatrics for their annual conference. If we weren't in the COVID world, then having a table would be easy, but trying to do that kind of outreach and engagement and somewhat of a marketing campaign and to think about marketing and communication strategies. I mean, we have a phenomenal website through the University of Michigan, and we have our Michigan State partners, and that's really helpful. But just that outreach and engagement and thinking about ways to build that up is something else that we would want to think about in terms of ways to improve things and further expand the work going forward.
Great. Those are great examples and great, I think, ideas for others too as they face similar challenges. Well, I know that everyone has learned a lot from all of you, and I'm sure have more questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take any questions from participants today, but for all of you, please do remember that you have the listserv. You can send your questions to your project officers, and they'll facilitate dialogue around them as well. Because I feel like this is probably just the beginning of a greater conversation. Thank you all so much for sharing all of your lessons learned and tips and challenges with us. You've been terrific, and I'm sure everyone is virtually clapping for you. And we could hear from you probably for a full another hour. But really appreciate you taking the time to reflect on your lessons learned with us. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Dawson, who's going to lead our last session of the meeting. Kelly.
Thanks, Lauren. All righty. So welcome to the last session of the first PMHCA All-Awardee meeting. We wanted to make sure we didn't end the meeting without awardees having the opportunity to touch base with your project officer or your grants management specialist. Many of us speak on a biweekly basis sometimes, and we've been talking, the majority of us, for the last year and a half. So as you know, your PMHCA project officers are Cara De La Cruz, myself, Kelly Dawson, and Madhavi Reddy. And your grants management specialists are Kalima Amin, Leon Harrison, and Crystal Howard. So we'll go over a few slides, but we really are here to address your questions and provide TA. Anything we're unable to address during these last couple of minutes of our meeting, we're happy to follow up with you after the meeting. So please use the chat pod to enter your questions. So I'll move on to the next slide. As you know, there are a number of reporting requirements and important due dates to track for this program. The 2018 cohort previously submitted the federal financial report, the NCC performance report, and which included the request for information. The 2018 cohort, moving forward, for your knowledge, the NCC performance report is due annually within 120 days of the award. The NCC progress report, which is an upcoming due date, which will be due June 16th, 2020, and annually thereafter. And just as a note for the 2018 cohort, guidance for that report will be uploaded into EHB in the second week of May, so that is just in a few weeks. Also for the 2018 cohort, the federal financial report is due 120 days after the end of the budget period in EHB in January and annually thereafter. So we just went through the FFR submission just a few months ago. So for the 2019 cohort, the non-competing continuation performance report is due within 120 days of the award on October 29th and annually thereafter. The NCC progress report is due March 17th, or was due March 17th, and annually thereafter. We just recently received that report from the 2019 cohort. And the federal financial report is due approximately 120 days after the end of the budget period in EHB on October 30th and annually thereafter. This information, you guys have heard all of these dates and should be familiar. It's also available in the Reports and Measures resource document we shared late last year, and it's also posted online. So I'm going to turn it over to Kalima with Grants Management.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Kalima Amin, and I am the Lead Grants Management Specialist on this program. I also have with me here today Crystal Howard and Leon Harrison, who work with you on some of your states. On behalf of the Division of Grants Management Operations, I do want to first thank you for this important work and the service that you're providing to your communities, especially during these very difficult times. In the interest of time, I will move rather quickly through the slides, at a really good pace. However, we will receive, you will receive the slides, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session. Primarily, we're just going to go over some of the tips and best practices for managing your grants, some things that are commonly, questions that are commonly asked. In the personnel section, you want to make sure you provide lots of detailed information of each person, their role and their responsibilities, the specific amount of funds requested for that salary, and the percentage of time each person will devote to the project. The current salary cap for Executive Level 2 is $197,300. On this slide, I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. The fringe benefits, and then the travel. You also want to provide detailed information about local and long-distance travel. And of course, I know at this time many are not traveling. On the equipment, one of the primary questions we receive is about how to evaluate equipment. Anything $5,000 or more per unit would be considered equipment. Everything else is going to be in your supplies category. Each item of equipment requested must have a specific cost per unit listed and its need explained and justified. Under contractual, you want to make sure that you provide detailed information about the contractual agreement. You must have an explanation and the associated costs for each item of service in the budget. Please note that the federal procurement guidelines must be followed on all goods and services purchased with federal funds. The other primary question we get from this slide is on indirect costs. Please remember to make sure you include your indirect cost rate agreement or indicate that in the budget narrative that you are going to claim the de minimis rate. More information about the indirect costs. If you do not have an agreement and you have not negotiated an agreement with the Division of Cost Allocation, you can defer to the de minimis rate. You can also request request an indirect cost rate agreement and go through that process. In the prior approvals, the primary requests that we receive are for rebudgeting as well as for PI changes. You want to make sure you submit all of your prior approval requests through the EHB system, and any approval that is not signed by the grants management officer is not valid. Some of the primary approvals, the most primary approvals that we submit are the PI changes, and if you want to replace the principal investigator on the project, you must get a prior approval for that. You're going to send that request through EHB, through your project officer, and then it will come to the grants management office. Please keep in mind, if you have any transfers of the entire grant from one entity to another, for example, if it's a grant that's maintained by the university and is transferring to the university foundation and they have a different EIN or DUNS number, this is going to be a lengthy process. You want to make sure that you reach out to your project officer and your grant specialist to get all of the required documents, and so you can get started in that process. It will take several weeks to complete such a transfer. Carryover request is probably the most requested item in the prior approvals, and this occurs when the grantee is moving unspent funds from one budget period to another. To request a carryover, you must have submitted an FFR that reflects an unobligated balance. You must also have completed your reporting requirements through the payment management system, and these are quarterly requirements at this time. And you want to make sure you provide a budget form SF-424 to show where the funds are going to be allocated. And please make sure you do not request funds to be moved to a category that was not previously approved in your original application. This will require an additional justification. This slide is just some more tips and reminders about managing your award. There's a resource here with the grants policy statement and some other information that can be helpful to you. We just want to remind you to always submit your financial reports on time as required by your grant terms and conditions, to please exercise sound fiscal responsibility, and anytime you have a question, reach out to your grants management specialist in advance. And it's important that you maintain the accuracy of your information in the systems of awards management, and most importantly, make sure we have your current contact information so we can reach out to you should we see any problems that may arise. This concludes the presentation, and I did go through fairly quickly. If you have any questions, I believe you can put them in the chat. Again, my name is Kalima Amin, and your other grant specialists are Crystal Howard and Leon Harrison, and they are also online today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kalima. As Kalima mentioned, please put any of your questions into the Q&A pod. We have a few more minutes to answer questions. I think we have one question coming through. Can you provide more information about purchasing promotional items used for provider outreach and recruitment using grant funds, i.e. Shirts, cups, etc.? Is this an allowable expense?
This is an allowable expense, and depending upon, it would most likely show up in your supply line item or if you have any type of training activities. And if you put this in your original application, of course, if it was approved, you can go ahead and expend those funds. However, if it's something that you're going to do that was not a part of the original application, you would need to submit a prior approval request to your project officer, and then it will come to us for final approval.
Okay. Thank you, Kalima. We have another question. Has there been consideration of barriers for travel with the pandemic and how that will affect budget? So I can start. Appreciate your question, Sandy. So we will likely address any questions related to COVID-19 following the meeting and how that will affect your budget. And of course, we'll be having conversations individually as that relates to your state. In the meantime, the HRSA does have a COVID-19 webpage, and I'll drop that link into the chat. There are a bunch of frequently asked questions there, but as it relates to the pandemic, please reach out to your project officer so that we can provide an accurate response. Anything to add, Kalima, or anyone else?
No, I was going to say the same thing about the frequently asked questions link that is available, and it's being updated daily, and that would be a great resource.
Okay. We still have a few more minutes. Are there any additional questions? Okay, I see one more question coming in.
Okay.
Do you anticipate any change in funding levels for the upcoming year given the fiscal environment? I'll turn that one over to you, Kalima.
I actually, we're getting daily updates, and I haven't received anything that I can share definitively. So I think I can get more information and send it to you by email. Or if anyone wants to email me directly, they can do that, and I can check with my leadership to find out what the best response is to that question.
Thanks, Kalima. I'm not seeing any more questions at this time, so I definitely wanted to open up the floor to the other POs or GMSs that want to mention anything before we close for the day.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks so much for moderating the panel. Also, I think Kara just sent a message saying, please send out the link so that everyone can get access that website for the frequently asked COVID-19 questions on the HRSA website. I think that the questions and responses are very comprehensive, so they should be very helpful to awardees as they kind of navigate these challenging times. And I see that Holly has added the link. So yes, please, awardees, please go to that link and access the frequently asked questions and also other COVID-19 resources that HRSA has put out.
All righty, thank you, Madhavi. So if we have a comment, I think, from Dr. Strauss, just let's see. Just congratulating us on a meeting. Thank you so much, Dr. Strauss, for your participation. So we're right at 1:51 Eastern Time. So I wanted to thank you all again so much for joining our All-Awardee meeting. I hope, of course, all of us in the future is that we can convene in person and continue to learn from each other. You'll receive an email shortly after this meeting ends with a brief evaluation. So please take 2 minutes to fill it out. We really appreciate your feedback. As you know, we'll be having meetings or convenings, all-awardee convenings and virtual meetings in the future funding years. So as we mentioned, we strongly encourage you to download the speaker bios so that you can connect with the speakers who, as you heard, are eager to hear from you and provide additional support. That includes also reaching out to your HRSA project officers or grants management specialists. We are here to help and support you all. You have access to the slides in the download pod, but we'll also follow up with an email to include the slides and some responses to your questions and other follow-ups that we were unable to get to today. I want to thank the Planning Committee, our leadership at HRSA. Special thanks to the Alterum team who did much of the IT and technological heavy lifting and coordinating behind the scenes. We want to thank you. And most of all, we want to thank all of the PMHCA awardees for your continued dedication to the mental and behavioral health of children and adolescents in our country. So everyone, stay well and have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.